To dedicate. That is what the word Hanukkah means. And every year between the end of November and the end of December, Jewish families celebrate this holiday. Hanukkah honors the events which took place over 2,300 years ago in the land of Judea, which is now Israel. And I borrow this telling of its origin from Ian Sugarman. Long, long ago, in a galaxy far, far away. Oh, wait, wrong story. I think that one is in the theaters if you want to learn about that one. Long ago, in the land of Judea, there was a Seleucid king named Antiochus. The king ordered the Jewish people to reject their religion and their beliefs and to worship the Greek gods. In the Jerusalem temple, he erected a statue of Zeus and demanded people to kneel before it. There were some who did as they were told, but many refused. One who refused was Judah Maccabee. Judah and his 4 brothers formed an army and chose as their name the word Maccabee, which means hammer. And after 3 years of fighting, the Maccabees successfully drove the Syrians, the Seleucid Empire, out of Israel and reclaimed the temple in Jerusalem. And the Maccabees wanted to clean the building and to remove the Greek symbols and statue. But they got to work, and eventually the job was finished and the temple was rededicated. When Judah and his followers finished cleaning the temple, they wanted to light the eternal light. This light is present in many Jewish houses of worship. And once lit, the oil lamp should never be extinguished. Only a tiny jug of oil was found with enough for a single day. The oil lamp was filled and lit, and then a miracle occurred as the tiny amount of oil, the last light, stayed lit not for 1 day, but for 8 days. The Festival of the Lights, as it is now called, lasts for 8 days to commemorate the miracle of the oil. This telling frames the story as one of victory, a celebration of the awesome might of the Maccabees. A colleague of mine, the one who we read a poem from earlier, Lynn Unger, points out that the secret moral of this tale seems to be this: if you work hard enough, you will prevail. The good guys win in the end. The bad guys get run out of town and injustice is made right. Everybody gets what they deserve. It's an encouraging message, even if for adults, a bit simplistic. Now, when I got to divinity school, I learned that the story of Hanukkah is not simplistic. It has a more complicated and, I would argue, interesting history. As it turns out, accounts of people observing Hanukkah occur in no written documents until years after the Maccabean revolt, which means that the story of the lamp and the practice of Hanukkah likely came about after the Jerusalem temple fell back into the hands of Israel's colonizers. What's crucial to note, I think, is that Hanukkah came to be practiced after the Maccabean victory ultimately failed. This changes the whole story for me. It's a lot like hearing a song with the lyrics, "Come and go with me to that land, there will be freedom in that land," and thinking it's about a group of people who live free and happy. It's only later that you discover "Come and go with me" is a spiritual from the period of slavery. It changes the meaning from one of joyful success and divine assurance to something else. It becomes something more like a desperate attempt to keep hope alive, or at worst, a denial of current oppression. When confronted with reversals of fortune of this magnitude, where assurance is lost and victory overturned, we may well reach the opposite conclusion that we did with the original telling of the Hanukkah story. rather than feel assured of victory, we might well ask if hope isn't pointless. Dave Pollard, in his lecture Against Hope, argues that it is pointless. Pollard believes that human beings almost always invert their own prospects for social and historical betterment. We don't need Jerusalem to be sacked to know this is true, he says. This is because societies have a remarkable way of reversing their own fortune. Most of the times that societies try to make things better, he argues, actually makes them worse. Pollard gives the contemporary example of encouraging people to purchase cars with better fuel efficiency. Some studies have shown that this actually encourages people to drive farther, thereby increasing emissions overall. Another example is when governments mandate increases in wages and corporations move offshore and pay even less to workers. All complex systems, he writes, self-perpetuate despite attempts to change them. This happens until they quickly and catastrophically collapse. Good news, huh? Now, his lecture was produced in 2015 before the most recent presidential election. And I can't help but wonder if some of what we are seeing in the current political arena isn't a complex system trying to equalize itself. We lived through a period when rights were extended to LGBTQ citizens in the form of marriage equality, health care was given to millions, and the country's first African-American president served for 8 years. Now, I wonder if we are experiencing a complex system, one with historically ugly elements, trying to self-perpetuate. Bigoted views that before the Obama years were publicly unsayable in most areas have gained much wider acceptance. In a paradoxical way, the progressive trajectory of the country has provoked voices that had long lied dormant and marginal. I am by no means the only person to notice this. Yuval Levin, who is a conservative writer and theorist, explicitly proposes that the political right should capitalize on this dynamic. In his book, The Fractured Republic, he suggests that liberals, in their promotion of universal human rights, tend to overreach. They may start out with a claim that most Americans would agree to, but then force their hand and go too far. His strategy in that book is to argue for how the political right can benefit from that overreach and produce animosity towards progressives. Levin's response in the last years of the Obama presidency was, just wait. Just wait. I think his work was prescient. In 2008, everything seemed a bit too, hopeful to heed that kind of warning. Hope was the watchword for the Obama years and was the central slogan for his first campaign. And now, in retrospect, it strikes me as a bit shallow. It might have been too enthusiastic that changes could be made, that compromise could be had, that systems in place for centuries could be fundamentally altered with a single presidency. It strangely mirrors the hope of the Hanukkah story without its historical context, the celebration of victory before the fall. Now we are in a place that is a lot darker, a lot less certain. There's far less clarity that the agenda of hope will last. I think that we need a deeper understanding of hope, and that is why I would turn from politics to theology. James Luther Adams was a pivotal figure in liberal theology in the 20th century, and he did not write during happy times. After spending time in Hitler's Germany, he began writing, to the shock of his readers, about optimism. Optimism. He says that optimism in the immediate context is often unwarranted. Hopes are thwarted all of the time, and the things we most want often go unfulfilled. However, there is something that he calls ultimate optimism. It is the idea that despite the current setbacks, reversals, and inversions, there is a longer trajectory upon which genuine hope can rest. This hope does not need the assurance of temporary success because it has the confidence of a longer arc. This is where I would situate my critique of Pollard's Against Hope lecture. He seems to believe that there is no such thing as forward movement in history, and that a new system that is equally bad comes to replace the last. This is wrong. Taking a longer view, the creation of human rights, the downward trajectory of violence, the abolition of slavery and child labor and public punishments are a few of the accomplishments of the past centuries. These were slowly built up by the small acts of communities and individuals that committed to making a difference. There were reversals and inversions, for sure. What we thought was going to be the hope and the change came to an end. But there was also positive momentum overall. The writer Rebecca Solnit argues this eloquently. She says, everything changes, and there lies most of our hope. If you take the long view, you'll see how startlingly, how unexpectedly, but regularly things change. Not by magic, but by the incremental effect of countless acts of courage, of love, and commitment, the small drops that wear away stone and carve new landscapes, and sometimes by torrents of popular will that change the world dramatically. To say that is not to say that it will all come out fine in the end regardless. I'm just telling you that everything is in motion, and sometimes we ourselves are that movement. Despair is often premature. It's a form of impatience as well as a form of certainty. Solnit continues by saying that her favorite comment about political change comes from Zhou Enlai, the premier of the People's Republic of China under Chairman Mao. Asked in the early 1970s about his opinion of the French Revolution, he reportedly answered, "It's too soon to tell." So what of Hanukkah? Isn't it ultimately a story of failure? As I mentioned, its tale was only told after the Maccabean revolt collapsed and Israel was recolonized. It is a story from a time after the victory ended. That is indeed a puzzling detail. Why create a ritual that celebrates a time that clearly went down to defeat? I would suggest that holding on to such hope, a hope that burns past the time that it should have been extinguished, that indeed may not be as worthless as it appears. After all, the dynasty of Antiochus finally crumbled, and the Seleucid Empire is long lost to history. The lights of the Hanukkah menorah are still lit today.